not attended one of our functions before, welcome. We hope you enjoy it. For those of you who have been to one of our functions before, thank you very, very much for coming back. We do appreciate it. My name is Bruce Holston. I'm the chairman of the Cape Fear Economic Development Council. Let's put this whole thing in perspective right now. We've got an incredible cast of characters here who are going to speak on a subject which we'll go into more detail shortly, but I'm going to make an unashamed pitch. For over 8 years, the Economic Development Council has been promoting concepts for addressing our region's economic growth strategies. We're not a think tank. We're not an academic endeavor. We're a group of concerned citizens, and there are a lot of concerned citizens in this council who are in this room who are active and some who are passive to pay attention to what's going on. We believe we can help define and implement best practices in land and resource management while successfully addressing the pressing social and economic issues that are addressing our community, not in terms just of population growth, which is going to be expansive, but also in terms of land development and, most importantly, maybe pollution control. Equally important, we believe in transparent public policies, clear guidelines that recognize the interconnectivity of the issues that are important to all of us on our quality of life, our quality of place. The sources of revenue that we can draw to this community are endless. We have all the assets necessary to be a successful community, to attract the right kind of businesses, that do the right kind of economic development strategies without sacrificing the public's health and to reach its many environmental assets. So in 2016, the Economic Development Council became a 501c3, and our reasons were specific. We thought we could continue to carry this message considering we are a staffless organization. We have a lot of very dedicated volunteers and over 4,000 subscribers and people who I otherwise refer to as stakeholders. But we've also become a membership firm. And as an organization that looks and relies on membership to survive and offer probably more programs of this caliber, we think it's necessary to start building a budget. And so there are several directors that you'll see around here and on your chair or somewhere near. There's a membership application. And I don't want to punt us specifically, but I do think that if you like the kind of conversation that's going to happen tonight, and if you've been to one of our meetings before, you understand what we do and why we do it, then I hope you choose to actually be moved from a stakeholder to a formal member. And we do take credit cards. So the idea here is to bring awareness, to be another voice, another seat at the table, and what is going to be a very small group of people who are making important decisions for our community. Any of those that follow our county commissions or our local councils will understand that decisions seem to be made in a vacuum, and this isn't always the case. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but we need more voices and more formal voices, not just to articulate what our feelings are about certain things, but actually to be at the table to discuss these things in a proactive, positive way. So in that context, the Cape Fear Economic Development Council wants to be a bridge. We are a nonpartisan organization. We do not reflect political values other than our commitment to the environment, our commitment to smart growth and sustainable economic development that provides jobs for everybody without sacrificing the common good. So I strongly encourage you, if you want to find out more information, speak to a director. And if you want anything else to kind of prod you on, you can go on to our website, CFEDC.com. And the idea is that we are going to build a force of people who can be accepted, recognized, and have a proper channel for conveying their feelings and concerns about a community that's going, and a country that's going through a lot of change, and quickly. Without further ado, though, let me now introduce Justin Guillory. And I was not giving your full bio, but I know it's a lengthy one. You're Executive Director of Think North Carolina First, and the sponsor of the roadmap, North Carolina Roadmap to 2025 mission.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
If it helps at all, Bruce, I can't stress how important it is on the state level for business voices to be heard in Raleigh and the state level for arguing for sustainable and environmental business practices. So encourage you to join. I'm just going to talk briefly about who we are, Think NC First, and then introduce the panel for this evening. And as Bruce said, I'm Justin Guillory, Executive Director of Think North Carolina First. And the North Carolina that we all know is no accident. It was created by forward-thinking leaders from the business community, political leaders, leaders from our universities, public and private sectors that work together and were wise enough to invest in the future. But and over those years, North Carolina earned a reputation as a leader and not a follower in public policy. But in the last few years, I'm afraid that's been lost. And I think a lot of you probably feel the same way, that, and if we want to get North Carolina moving forward again, we have to know where to start. And that's where Think NC first came in. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank, but we don't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, it's our job to we believe in decision-making that's based on science and on evidence. And Think's signature project is the Roadmap 2025. In that, we brought together a group of business leaders, community leaders, and policy experts, and split them up into 5 different working groups. We had a group on education, one on economic growth and opportunity, one on healthy families, one on clean energy and environment, another one on infrastructure. And over the course of a year, those working groups met and debated policies that we thought would be important for the future of North Carolina. We released the final list of the policy recommendations in 2016. We've actually already seen some significant progress on some of those items, especially during the current state legislative session going on right now. You can visit nc-roadmap.org to find the full list. I'm also going to pass around this little pamphlet and maybe give you an abbreviated version of some of the ideas. But tonight's event is going to focus on economic development portions of the roadmap. And I strongly encourage each and one of you to speak up, ask questions, debate. We realize that Raleigh doesn't have a monopoly on good ideas. And so we are always actively listening for new ideas, new good ideas that we can take a hold of, do more research on, and advocate for. So I'm going to take a minute to introduce our panelists now. Probably take me 15 minutes to read all of their accomplishments, but in the interest of being able to have a group discussion, I'm going to summarize. Honored to have, let's see, Jim Fain, and here is a principal with Reid Street Consulting, where he works on public policy and economic development issues. Jim's the former...
I might interrupt and say I just do what my wife tells me.
Yes. Jim's the former president and CEO of the Global Trans Park in Kinston and served as North Carolina's Secretary of Commerce from 2001 to 2008. Prior to his career in public service, Jim had a 24-year career at First Union Bank. Anita Graham is currently a professor at UNC's School of Government, where she leads an initiative to increase schools' capacity to work with public officials on public policy issues. And before that, she was the director of the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State for 10 years, and in that role is one of the leading thinkers about the future of our state. Many of you probably know Lloyd Smith. He's president of Cortex Solutions in Wilmington and a director with the Cape Fear Economic Development Council. I know Lloyd also through his work as a director of the North Carolina Business Council. I just wanted to say thank you to Lloyd, especially because for inviting us to participate in this event tonight. Thank you and Bruce for your leadership, as we wouldn't be having this event without you. And finally, Sarah Crawford is a nonprofit and political professional, more than 15 years of experience in public policy, community outreach, and fundraising. She's the owner of her small business, Willow Strategies, where she consults nonprofits like Think NC First, where she's been working for the last couple of years managing our roadmap project. I'll also mention that Sarah ran for the North Carolina State Senate in 2014 in one of the most competitive, most expensive elections in state history. And she put education and economy at the top of her campaign platform. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to lead our discussion.
Thank you, Justin. I did not win the election, despite being the most expensive. I was not successful. But I know I get to be here with you all. thank you so much to the Cape Fear Economic Development Council for hosting us, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I'm so proud to lead this esteemed panel. I know Lloyd, I've known you for 6 months, a whole 6 months now. I have certainly known Jim and Anita from their work out of the Triangle area, and what an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you. Well, we're going to get started. So just to give y'all a sense of the format, we're going to have a moderated panel discussion for 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions and also comments. As Justin said, part of our role with Think North Carolina First is to really hear the things that are on your minds as well, and to take those ideas and continue fleshing out roadmap and potentially other projects that Think North Carolina First does as well. But I'm going to open it up with Jim and Anita. I'd like to just start with each of you come with vast experience in working across the state and economic development issues. And I'd love to hear your perspective. I'd love for you to share your perspective with the folks about what you think has been going well in North Carolina, maybe what hasn't been going so well, and what you need to do better. Quick overview.
Want me to start?
Sure.
Well, so that I don't ramble too much, I might read a little bit of my notes. I'd give a little bit of a nerdy historical perspective of economic development.
Okay, so you're just trying to show me up because you have notes and you're all prepared, right?
That's why you don't need that. I'm on the other hand. I've always been impressed with this definition of economic development. I first heard it from a guy named Jess White, who both a Washington bureaucrat, he would say on occasion, in economic development, as well as a faculty member at UNC Chapel Hill. And so he wrote of economic development as the creation, and I'm quoting him here, the creation of long-term capacity, ongoing production of high-end jobs, sound companies, and widely distributed wealth. And of course, people say that means educating and developing the state's workforce, strengthening communities, building modern infrastructure, and supporting innovation and fostering a great business climate. And of course, I guess the point of this is economic development is not what's often in the news. It's, let's say, recruiting buffaloes, as Al and I were discussing. Incentives regularly come to the fore in those kind of discussions. It's really what kind of strategies do you have as a state for preparing yourself to be successful in economic development so that you enhance economic well-being and quality of life of all citizens. And that means building an economy built on citizen education and, of course, on innovation and modern infrastructure. And, of course, a vision statement we used to use when I worked in the Commerce Department was a state of well-educated people, critical thinkers, committed to wise, consistent investment in innovation and infrastructure, which differentiates itself as a state of knowledge workers who drive business success, a true state of mind, which is our branding. I think all of you all know that investors or employers, the number one thing that's important to them is talented people, smart people, energetic people, and so a well-trained workforce is kind of job one, I guess, in economic development. And of course that means, and has meant in this state, as we've tried to follow Jess's advice, and have done, I think, fairly well over the last 50 years, to develop those things that will support economic development, that infrastructure for economic development. Excellent university system, of course, including UNCW. We were the first in the nation to deliver workforce training through our large statewide system of community colleges. And we were a pace setter in that. Reasonably consistent support of our K through 12 system, creating Smart Start in pre-K, NC pre-K, or I still call it Morris Forward, but really focusing as a state and being a leader in early childhood. through MCNC back in the 80s, we set the stage to put fiber in the ground all around our state with great foresight out there. We've developed our ports, as you know. We are fortunate to have a hub airport. We have invested through the Rural Center and its derivatives in rural North Carolina. And of course, I think we've been a leader in understanding that businesses and citizens care about the environment and they want to do business in and live in places that put a value on caring for our water and our air and our natural resources. So I think all through the, I guess I would say through the 50s on through the 90s, we were about that business of building that economic development infrastructure. And I guess as the world, in particular the Southeast, became more competitive in terms of economic development, I might call it development, but it's really getting and growing companies that can provide good jobs. We also, like it or not, realized the need that to be successful, we also needed to create responsible, well thought out incentives. So, in the early 2000s, we developed those kind of programs and have tried to use them prudently. And I think this group would be interested to know that undergirding those programs has always been an expectation that to earn those incentives and to be induced by those incentives, you have to pass some environmental tests that are a part of the program. You need to pay a better average wage than the average of where you're proposing to be induced for jobs and so forth. So I think I would say that we try to use and augment our long-standing investments into things that really count with prudent and well-thought-out incentive programs. And that includes, of course, film incentives, which we learned, and I guess I used to work with the Commerce Department and made a few trips to Hollywood and came to understand incentives were pretty doggone important, but we're becoming more and more important in that realm. So that's another area where we thought it made sense to have well-thought-out programs. Now, with in terms of where we are, with the advent of the Great Recession, and I would say perhaps gracefully some new policy directions from Raleigh.
That is graceful and generous.
And I guess the epitomization of that is HB2. Things have become more challenging for our state in various ways, and certainly in terms of how we're regarded outside the state. I think we're fortunately still regarded hopefully, but people do, as you know, scratch their heads and say, what in the heck has been going on in North Carolina? So, in summary, I think the way forward is we need to address those issues, and that certainly includes getting rid of HB2, continuing our long history of investing in education. I think we need to pay special attention these days to a rural strategy that can make sense and urban-rural divide has become exacerbated over time. So with that in mind, I feel like the state needs to adopt a new comprehensive economic development strategic plan and get about the business and try to put it in place.
Thank you, Jim. I'm always happy to follow you because I don't have that much that I need to say. Jim may or may not remember that at one point he was my boss when he was Secretary of the Department of Commerce for, I don't know,
2 hours.
6, I think it was more like 4 months, and then you told me enough of this, I can't handle it anymore. Go back to where you came from. But at the time, we were both working for a governor who used to talk about there being 2 North Carolinas, rural and urban, and Jim just mentioned this. It strikes me that the question of whether we're going in the right direction is really a question of whether North Carolina has the capacity to respond to the dramatic changes that are confronting the state and whether that capacity exists across the state. In my mind, today, when we think about North Carolina, we aren't thinking about an urban and rural North Carolina. We're thinking about 5 categories of communities that are all being asked to deal with unprecedented growth in this state, continued urbanization of the state, what is happening with the automation of jobs in the state, and the spatial and people-based inequality that is taking place in the state. In my 5 buckets of communities, the first bucket only has 2 communities in it. It's Raleigh and Charlotte. And those 2 communities are facing all of those challenges, but the reality is they have resources to respond to those challenges. When I go to Charlotte and I talk about automation, for example, and I say Charlotte is predicted to lose 54,000 retail sales workers in the next decade. That's a big number. But when you look on the other hand at how many jobs Charlotte is projected to produce in the next decade, you can see how they can absorb that kind of change in a way that isn't true of all communities. In the second bucket, I look at places like Wilmington and Asheville and Greensboro that are doing really interesting things, that are moving forward, but that could really use some supportive infrastructure from state policy to help them move forward. My third category are also urban areas, but it's important to recognize that when we talk urban development, and we somehow presume that that means that urban areas are all doing well in North Carolina or all progressing, the reality is that isn't true. In North Carolina, we have small cities, towns that are kind of our rust belt. There were our manufacturing places. They have been struggling for years. They continue to struggle. Many of them are losing population. They need a whole different strategy in order to have the capacity to respond to changes. And then my final 2 categories are our rural communities. If you're in an area that is rich in amenities or attractive to retirees, you probably will be okay as a rural community. If you're in an area that is geographically remote, that doesn't have those assets, you're going to continue to struggle as a rural area. So this question of, are we in the right direction at a macro level, sometimes masks the reality that we've got to look at that different kinds of communities and ask the question, is the state providing the infrastructure, the capacity necessary to respond to changes based on the kinds of communities we have?
Thank you. I'd like to now pivot based on what you just said and talk a little bit about Wilmington. Before I get there, Lloyd, I'd like to ask you, Anita, a follow-up question. In terms of Wilmington's ability to absorb the type of change that you're talking about in these various buckets, what type, you said before you got to the last part, supportive infrastructure to help them move forward. What does that look like from the state perspective? What does that look like in terms of policy that provides that supportive infrastructure?
So let me say this about Wilmington, because I'm a huge fan for reasons that some folks in this room recognize. In my previous job at the Institute for Emerging Issues, we held a forum on the innovation economy in North Carolina. And we worked with SAS to try to determine where the innovation economy actually was in North Carolina. And nobody, including the folks at the Department of Commerce, were prepared for the reality that 67% of North Carolina's innovation economy was in 3 counties in the state. Guess which counties?
Well, I heard New Hanover.
Mecklenburg.
Okay, New Hanover was not on the list either.
Durham because of our TV.
Durham, Wake, and to a much lesser extent, Mecklenburg.
Much
It was-
lesser.
Yeah, it was really Wake and Durham because of the RTIP. Everybody was stunned because this is supposed to be the innovation state, right? That's what we do, is innovation, technology, etc. Except, actually, we just do it in 3 places. When we looked at the reality that those 3 places had that disproportionate percentage most likely to grow in the next 20 years, it was clear that we had to do something about that. And so the Institute for Emerging Issues organized this program, Innovate-NC, picked 5 places across the state that would participate, and the Wilmington coastal region was one of the areas. So, yay, Wilmington, I love you. What can I say? From the bottoms up, a few things that were clear. Wilmington had to get clear about its strategy. Lots of things that you could do, lots of assets that you could build on. I read the Garner report. You don't have enough lifespan for all the things included in that report. Perhaps collectively, but you know what I'm saying, right? So coming together and saying, okay, we're going to get really focused on an asset base that allows us to really build up an entrepreneurial ecosystem that makes sense in the 21st century needed to happen, and it has happened, and I'm really excited to see it. It's not that it happened easily. There's some friends in the room who are participants in the Innovation Council for Innovate-NC. I still see the scars on the top of their foreheads from some of those meetings. It's all God's work, don't worry about it. Wonderfully exciting. Now to your question. As a local community organizes itself, figures out what its strategic direction ought to be, works to try to build around that strategic direction, what should it be able to expect from the state of North Carolina to support that work? I think it ought to be able to expect an integrated economic development policy and workforce development policy that maximizes the resources that come to this area. First thing. I think North Carolina has yet to develop or deliver that kind of integrated policy. Workforce development is all over the place, and very rarely, even with it being brought into the Department of Commerce, is it really part of a synthesized, cogent, compelling economic development policy for the state. First thing. Second thing, Wilmington was one of the few communities that decided that it wanted to have a regional strategy. What does the state have to offer to support communities that are trying to work beyond geographic boundaries? For a long time, we used our economic development partnerships. Now we have our prosperity zones. It really isn't clear to me that from a state perspective, there is either incentive for or infrastructure to support regional strategies, although everybody gives lip service to the fact that that's the way to go. And then the final thing I would say, you may have your differences of opinion around economic incentives, and certainly as the state begins to deliver different regional approaches, there are challenges to figure out what specific incentives will be supportive, but there needs to be more conversation at the state level and the local level so that when we do deliver on specific industry incentives, we're doing it from a perspective of understanding what the true opportunities are and what the opportunity costs might be if we fail to deliver.
So I would say ditto. And Anita and I talked quite a bit, and I suspect we'll talk a lot more about regional approaches to economic development. And I have shared with her what I refer to as the one-pager. And I've burdened Sarah with that too. But basically the concept is that we, using empirical measurements to determine what are the economically interdependent sub-regions in our state, find a way to bring those contiguous geographies together, the leadership of those regions, and support them with a, I guess everybody uses the term SWOT analysis, but basically a process working together to figure out what their strengths are, of course, what they need to work on and all those things, with the idea that they're better off working on that together and that their assets are leveraged by virtue of thinking in these sub-regional groups and so forth. And I think a logical characteristic, certainly Wilmington comes into play here, of each of these sub-regions is that they have a hub city, a larger, more robust, more diverse center for the region that helps them play or develop their regional strengths. And I think that this really centers then around a bias to collaboration in these sub-regional groups, thoughtful and well-supported planning and analysis, and then creating plans for which there is consensus, and then aggregating resources within the region in ways that make sense and they're equitable, augmented by targeted state investments through existing funds we have. But I would argue that the state, to do regional development well, needs to develop a fund that can be focused in each of these regions to help them realize the potential that they have based on their assessment of assets and strengths. And I would hope that we can begin a process like that. And it, simply put, involves putting resources to bear on this problem, and that means that I think the state needs to invest along with the regions. But regions need to think in terms of their collective assets and the things that they can bring to the table. So I hope this is a direction we'll take to get real serious about regional development. Why does it matter? Why is it important? Where smaller, less populous, less wealthy counties be at the table and be at the party. Well, they all have something to contribute, and I think it's important that we aggregate our efforts and make sure that everybody stays on the train working together. So I hope that we can take an approach like that to bring some methodical approach to, and a serious approach and a well-funded approach to regional development.
All right, Lloyd.
So I'm on the spot. I have a very little window here to talk about all the issues.
Well, I think so you all are doing some regional development work. Would money help?
I think what Jen said about creating the incentive for regional stakeholders to work together is an important one, because what we've seen is there's a tendency when left to their own devices for groups and areas or regions to advocate for what serves them best, but not to feel compelled to work together. So creating an incentive to work together, to me, is right on point for our region.
We had a program long ago at the Commerce Department. It's called 21st Century Communities. And it was the program I was just talking about, writ small, I guess you would say. It was one-off county efforts to plan and assess their capabilities and their possibilities. And we provided a lot of planning support and so forth for that. But in those days, we were very clear to say we don't have any money to put into these things. And that was a detriment. And I think you're right. To make this work, we need to bring people to the table in part by putting external money into the
And that goes, your second point was incentive for these regional structures or an infrastructure to support them. To share with us a little bit about what's happening here in Wilmington, I'm sure you all are all aware, but we are not necessarily.
So on that particular topic, I made a list of things, and as I'm listening to the conversation and talking to people tonight, I added a lot to that list, but that's at the bottom of my list. Things that have happened that I think are good examples of addressing these. The loss of the film incentives then turned into the gain of the new grant program, which is a step in the right direction. It's certainly not bringing back the people that we're losing. It's a step in the right direction. So creating the entrepreneurial ecosystem, as you discussed, that is happening. When I arrived here in 2001, it didn't exist. And there wasn't a place for an entrepreneurial land, but there is now. So that is great to see. Tech Mountain, Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and all the other organizations working around the Biotech Center, for example, and the Clinical Research Cluster, those efforts are welcome, and they seem to be on point as far as I'm concerned with a purpose, an economic gardening, finding what has worked here and trying to recreate those conditions or grow those conditions so that more of that happens. So other things related to growing and developing our economy, some a little bit more controversial, the special use permit process, where we have a special use permit that was maybe a little over-restricted, that then was, through collaboration, was modified. Now we're coming up on a unified development ordinance process. So those things, comprehensive planning, Garber report, as you mentioned, those efforts are good to see. It requires everyone to get out of their little silo and talk to each other and understand the lay of the land and how what they're doing impacts everyone else, and vice versa. So those are some of the things related to what has happened or what each region has done. The things that I wanted to make sure that I address, though, that come from our board and the discussion preparing for tonight, relate more to what we would like to see or not see come from the state. Number one, don't screw it up. You know, what you said, what Justin said early on about the reputation for leadership in education, the reputation for having great natural assets that we take care of, cultural heritage, historic preservation, all that is great, but only to take care of it, and that is what attracts and keeps people here. And people are the embodiment of those companies that we want to attract and keep. Another thing that was discussed was that we really regret seeing and hope to see less of a race to the bottom as far as lowest taxes, eliminating all regulation. These things, for me as a business person, don't make any sense. I don't need the lowest taxes. Be somewhere in the middle. Don't be extreme, but common sense regulations make sense to me. But eliminating all regulations doesn't make this a better place to live, work, grow a company. So, you know, don't race to the bottom. That's one key thing. I think another point that was brought out, and this is my last point, is just building trust in local institutions and government by maintaining a level of control at the local government, the local institution level. Any efforts to undermine local authority are viewed with suspicion, and they only serve to make the people in our region more suspicious of the motives of the state government. If we can maintain a certain level of local control, I think that goes a long way toward building trust.
I would observe, by the way, that one thinks of regional strategies and making state-level investments in a region's potential. The film incentives are a good example of something that makes sense based on the platform that's in place here. And this is a way we can continue